BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. This episode of Black Box Online Radio is brought to you by McFarland Books, a great place to explore the true crime world and to learn more about the human experience. Their titles cover subjects ranging from the stories of law enforcement to the unsolved crimes of South Florida. Please visit McFarlandBooks.com for more. Okay, and I would like to give another big thank you to McFarland Books for their sponsorship of this program, and they've also provided me with one of their titles, The Flat Tire Murders, Unsolved Crimes of a South Florida Serial Killer by Michael P. Burns, and I will be doing a response to that in the near future for the Anything Goes segment. But Anything Goes segments come out on Fridays, and today is a Thursday, and something new that I've launched on this channel is the Versus series that is talking about the comparisons and the contrasts between different serial killers and true crime figures. And when I was polling you guys and asking what true crime cases would you like to hear about for the new Thursday segment, you guys voted for the Long Island serial killer, so I'm going to be working more Long Island serial killer material into this Versus series, but I thought it was going to be very productive if we talked about the Unabomber and the Anthrax killer. And for the sake of this discussion, I will be referring to Bruce Ivans as the Anthrax killer. I did 2 episodes about him recently, and it's more or less a response to the show that was put out on Nat Geo called The Hot Zone Anthrax. It is a 6-part miniseries, and it is more or less, I guess you would say, the first 3 episodes look at the investigation into the Anthrax killer and trying to find out who was mailing these letters back in 2001 that were laced with anthrax, which ultimately led to the deaths of 5 people. So the first 3 episodes are about the investigation, and the second 3 episodes were looking at Bruce Ivans as a person, and I think I described it as following someone on their descent into madness. It's a very entertaining program, though. The Hot Zone Anthrax, as well as the first season that they did, called just that, The Hot Zone, which was about Ebola. But in the Versus series, there's a particular differentiation that we need to make between the Unabomber and the Anthrax killer. The Unabomber is Ted Kaczynski. He was caught, identified, convicted. Alright, Ted Kaczynski was the Unabomber. With the Anthrax killer, most people believe that Bruce Ivans was the Anthrax killer. However, he was not convicted for this, and I explored this a lot, especially in the first part of the episode I did, Hunting the Anthrax Killer, Part 1, which looks at the possibility, did he actually do it? There is a very large debate in the true crime world, and I don't believe that everyone is in 100% consensus that Bruce Ivans was the Anthrax killer, that he actually had that he actually was the person who created those letters that were responsible for the deaths of the 5 people that I just mentioned. So that is another differentiation. And before we go any further in the program, I would like to remind you guys that a great way to support this show, in addition to just listening to some of the material, is to go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel murder mystery inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is fictional. And you can also visit the Teespring page, have a look at some of the merchandise, and remember, being weird is not a crime. I thought that the Unabomber and the Anthrax killer would be a profitable discussion because both of these people were serial killers who operated from a distance. They mailed in their toxic and destructive methods of murder, whereas most serial killers might do something like shooting the victim, stabbing them with a knife, strangulation, blunt force trauma. The Anthrax letters and the Unabomber were both using the postal service, and some people believe that that is a form of cowardice, that this one person doesn't want to get up close and personal, this person doesn't want to touch the victims, they don't want to feel anything. They want to inflict pain and misery and terror and ultimately murderous tendencies onto society. And not only do they want to murder people, they want to create an image, a public figure. They want to create fear, terror, panic. They want the world to be afraid of them, but they don't want to get caught. Oh no, they don't want to be identified. I think that that is very clear with the Anthrax Killer and the Unabomber. But with both of these people, I think that there is also a sense of intelligence and bragging about how smart they are. Not, I mean, Ted Kaczynski very famously wrote the Unabomber Manifesto. He was trying to draw attention to that. And Bruce Ivins was also very outspoken about things like religion, philosophy, and actually, on that note, let's look at a very big contrast. Ted Kaczynski was a guy who just didn't cut it in society. Yeah, okay, he's gonna go into Harvard, had some bad experiences. He's gonna try to go out to California and be a math professor. He gave up. Didn't do it. Not for him. Why do I say this? Because Ted Kaczynski moved to a little cabin in Lincoln, Montana, the Unabomber's cabin, and he is practically described as a hermit. Bruce Ivins, if he was the Anthrax Killer, which many believe he was, did not do that. He continued after school. He got his PhD, and he was a microbiologist, got married, had kids, and was a very active member of society. He played the piano and the keyboards for his church. He founded a group called the Frederick Jugglers, and you can see him, the actor playing him, Tony Goldwyn, in the Hot Zone Anthrax. They even loosely draw attention to his juggling abilities, and they really wanted to show that Bruce Ivins is someone who perhaps was viewed as a very comical figure, the guy who's always trying to make people laugh. He has a rough-edged sense of humor. Sometimes he has a sense of humor where it seems like he is trying to be entertaining, but only entertaining himself. And I thought that one of the aspects of that program that I didn't hear about in too many of the reviews, or read about it rather, is that it's almost as if music was twofold in his life, where playing the piano was something that he was using as a self-soothing mechanism, like he's playing the piano to deal with stress and to an activity that brings him a sense of comfort, right? But it was also fueling his destructive tendencies because of the complexity of the music, and it was a time when he can even you start playing songs in a very silly way, in an uproarious way, in an outrageous way, making a mockery of very terrible things. But, for the church or for the Frederick Jugglers or being married and having children, that is a very big difference with the Unabomber, because Ted Kaczynski seemed like someone who was not only cut off from the world, but tried to interact in society, but did not make it. But I did point out, though, that Bruce Ivins was educated at the doctorate level. He had a PhD, became a microbiologist. Ted Kaczynski also had a doctorate, PhD in mathematics. So you have someone who is not only intelligent, but also very well educated and choosing to commit crimes from a distance. I mean, like mailing in these destructive entities, whether it's a bomb or the Anthrax letters. And I think with almost any person who's going to do this, whether it's the Zodiac Killer or perhaps David Berkowitz and the Son of Sam letters, or even some of the hoaxers out there, like that guy who made the 112 Dirtbag channel. I don't even want to say his name. His last name is Olson. I know it, but I don't want to share it because of just that. Somebody said, though, about how people who do these types of creations in the true crime world, even if they're writing a letter taking credit for crimes that they didn't commit, or they're doing a video like the 112 Dirtbag guy who was actually mocking the disappearance of Maura Murray. I remember a comment that was actually written by a psychologist in referring to that video from the missing Maura Murray case, and they said that this person might view their nasty creation as the greatest thing they've ever done. And with all serial killers who create these taunting messages, I definitely think there is that type of braggadocious element where the person is trying to say, I'm a murderer, I kill people, I'm destructive, I'm smarter than you, I'm more dangerous than you are, and you will never figure out who I am. So by that same thinking, yes, I believe that the Anthrax killer and the Unabomber perhaps both thought that all of their destructive and illegal creations were the greatest accomplishment of their life. Now with Ted Kaczynski, he experienced something that I believe it's actually in 1958, although I talked about it a lot in my episode on the conspiracies of the 1960s, because in the 1960s there are a lot of alleged experiments that happened with mind control in the CIA. But I believe Kaczynski went into these experiments in 1958 when he was at Harvard. And I misspoke in one episode. I said that he was 17. I believe he was actually 16 when this started, and he was involved in a paid experimental trial where they would interview alienated students, and this is done by Dr. Henry Murray. They would interview alienated students, and they wanted to see how people would respond to interrogation tactics, and they would ask them questions about what they believed, and then they would talk about their worldview. And they had people who were trained in legal arbitration, for lack of a better term, legal studies, people who are very good at dismantling other people's arguments, do just that. Try and challenge and negate and refute this person's belief system. And it seemed absolutely, humiliating to Kaczynski in the recreations. I mean, I wasn't present, but there's some dramatic recreations that you can watch on YouTube. And because Ted Kaczynski was underage at the time, as I said, 16 years old, his mother had to sign a permission slip so that he could undergo that, so he could go through that type of process. And I was talking to Mark Hewitt about this, who is the author of the Zodiac Serial Killer trilogy, Hunted, Profiled, and Exposed. Mark Hewitt is a believer that Ted Kaczynski was not only the Unabomber, but also the Zodiac Killer, and I interviewed him on the Zodiac Killer channel's Interviews with the Experts series. I'm also the host of that program. And he was talking about how Kaczynski said that he kept going with those experiments because he didn't want them to win. He couldn't let them break him. But in all reality, as somebody who has been a 16-year-old male who is very alienated from society, yeah, I know exactly what that feels like. He was probably already broken. Now, I think some people would be listening to that and just saying, okay, so these people who are good at argumentation and debate, like, they are challenging his worldview, they're challenging his belief system. Well, so what? I think some people wouldn't care at all, and they're just like, whatever, I do what I want. I think there are some other people who would view that as just absolutely devastating, because you have to think about it, an alienated person, all he has is his own mind, the things that he tells himself over and over again, and then people challenge that, and people try to tell him that everything he's thinking is flawed, inappropriate, wrong, incorrect, and they have reasons, and they create mental loopholes, argumentative trickery, and maybe in some cases they genuinely show that there are unforeseen errors in his thinking, and he doesn't have the ability to learn about things on his own terms. People are trying to embarrass him, and I think that was a very devastating effect, had a very devastating effect on him. But the fact that his mother signed that permission slip is what stands out to me, because with serial killers, you tend to see a Well, a problem with parents. I mean, parents are the biggest influences on our personality, moral compasses, perhaps even sexuality. And they're, the brain experiences certain types of responses when parents are involved. Like, say, for example, his mother signed the permission slip. Oh, he would resent her for putting him into this program. She's the person who's supposed to keep him safe. She's the person who's supposed to know better. And with the Anthrax killer, Bruce Ivans, this really went on overdrive. His mother was described as being very abusive. His mother was described as being some type of just physically and emotionally abusive wreck. And they even had this recreation in the hot zone where she just beats his father until he's just bleeding all over the kitchen. And Bruce Ivans also learned at an early age that his mother had tried to abort him. Like she had tried to have the abortion, but it failed. I mean, he was born in the 1940s. This is well before abortion was legalized in the country in the 1970s. So people did a lot of it behind closed doors. Now, that is the stuff that serial killers are built on. That is the stuff that you will find about. You'll find out about it all the time when you read up on serial killers and when you watch serial killer documentaries and you listen to podcasts about serial killers. There is some type of event in their life that they view as a betrayal. That one of their parents, if not both of them, did something or said something or revealed some information that showed them that they were not loved in the way that they thought that a human being was supposed to be loved. Or they felt that this person was doing something evil and nasty to me, and the person who's supposed to keep you safe isn't keeping you safe. So what do? Absolutely nothing. They just sit on that very unpleasant information and they wait. And then later on in their life, they unleash their destructive tendencies. And as I was learning about Bruce Ivans, as I said, for the episodes that I did recently, I almost felt that it was all coming together in a package that was too neatly wrapped. Everything that I was looking for was just so clearly there. All right, the betrayal from his mother. Okay, the oddball sense of humor. But with both Bruce Ivans and Ted Kaczynski, there appears to be some type of sexual frustration that began perhaps at a very early age, and then that carried on into their adult years. And not only is it a sexual issue, it is also a dominance issue. They wanted to dominate other people, but they didn't believe that they had the physical means to do so. They also didn't believe that they had the ability to become the biggest leader of the pack or to become the president of the United States. And you do see this time and time again with serial killers that they believe that they are better than the majority of society. However, certain people along the way, whether it's their parents or maybe some other outside influences, have prevented them from living the life that they feel they deserve. So again, they do nothing at first, and then they develop a sense of resentment, discontent, and they choose to unleash their destructive tendencies in a vengeful way later on in life. And yes, some serial killers are sexually motivated where they actually feel arousal and they can even ejaculate during the murders. With both the Anthrax killer and the Unabomber, I don't think we can actually know those specific details because they murdered from a distance. But it I also learned from Mark Hewitt that Ted Kaczynski was some guy who would put the bombs together and then disassemble them and do it over and over again. It would almost be like he's spending more than 100 hours working on a bomb that only needs 10 hours of work. And they thought that he is getting some type of sexual satisfaction or sexual, what would be the exact word? Sexual reward from the creation of this very destructive device. Now, I think the Anthrax killer would have operated like that, just with less physical contact, of course, because of dealing with the anthrax letters. Now, some people hide their emotions. Some people use the term bottle them up. I don't like that term. Some people do not share anything. You might hear this thing about somebody who is involved in a true crime case, maybe not even a serial killer, just someone who is involved in a homicide, and you're like watching a documentary or listening to a show, and they say, well, he was a very private guy. Well, he was really quiet. And the thing that I was even hesitant to tell you about is, I mean, the stand-up comedian Chris Titus talked about this very clearly. He's like, every time they always say the same thing. He was a very quiet guy. He was a very private guy. Right. But then, there is the other side of the coin. Some people open the floodgates. I'm one of those people. No, I don't kill people, being very clear about that. But yes, I was someone who opens the floodgates and reveals too much, and not everything is true and not everything is false. Like, say, for example, it's not hiding your emotions. You tell people about what you're feeling, but then sometimes you'd perhaps say things that aren't relevant to what you're feeling, but you kind of just say it all at once, and then you're telling people too much information as opposed to too little. You're telling people too much information, and they can't figure out where the important parts are. That was something that I definitely did in my teen years, and for me, it was somewhat of a retaliation because everybody was telling me that I was quiet and they thought that I wasn't sharing enough personally. So then, all right, well, I started sharing things, but then also saying things that weren't actually relevant to feelings and emotions. And then the listener can't differentiate, well, the important parts from the parts that aren't important. I think you can get the idea. And with Bruce Ivans, I definitely think he would be in that latter category. Not someone who is hiding his feelings. Instead, he's putting everything out there, but doing it in a confusing way in which the other people cannot understand. Now, there's an interesting line in the Hot Zone, Anthrax, which talks about Bruce Ivans' mental state. And no, it's not like they're interviewing his real doctor on camera. There is an actress who is playing his doctor. Her name was Dr. Hallstrom, if I recall correctly. And this is not baseless, though. Bruce Ivans did spend years in therapy, and they did obtain these records, and that was put into a book that I was talking about with Tyler Grover, who may be sending that one to me in the future, and there will also be a book discussion on something related to the Anthrax killer. But I found that he was sharing lots of things with the therapist, and in the Hot Zone Anthrax, she even suggested that he might be a schizophrenic. She said possible schizophrenia. Okay, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not anything of the sort, but I was talking about schizophrenia in one episode, and somebody recommended that I watch the lectures from Robert Sapolsky from Stanford University, and he has a couple out on schizophrenia, and the first one that I was watching talked about that very concept, that it is very unlikely that schizophrenia would come into someone's life after the age of 30. Usually it's the teen years up to the late 20s when schizophrenia is taking shape. And I, again, don't want to say any more than that because it's not like I can tell you the things the way that a doctor can. I'm only revealing that because I believe that somebody like Bruce Ivans perhaps would have been more easily diagnosable as a schizophrenic at that point in life, but some people are erroneously diagnosed. However, here's a point of contrast. Ted Kaczynski was most likely a schizophrenic, and Mark shared this one with me as well. I believe it was in our first interview that he was given a provisional diagnosis of schizophrenia, and the person interviewing him was leaning that way, but the examinations were interrupted. So that's why it's called a provisional diagnosis. But as I said, Bruce Ivans spent years in therapy. He also was very open about having certain amounts of mental instability, but still holding on to his intellect and saying that, again, he's a very smart person, someone who has very high reasoning skills. Other people are inferior and inadequate at doing their jobs. He's also very outgoing to a certain extent, But then at the same time, he also spends very long periods of time on his own where he is drinking, walking around, wondering if he's going to get into some troublesome issues. But more importantly, I think that we need to talk about deviant behavior. For example, with Bruce Ivans, he would harass people who were connected to the Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority, and it was even said that he wanted to be a Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority sister, but he was unable to. And I said before that I think that is just a pure act of domination. He can't control them physically, so he wants to control them by means of his own deviant behavior. And yes, that is sexually motivated, just indirectly. So he would do things like nasty pranks and graffiti, stealing their code book and cipher, mind you. But with somebody like Ted Kaczynski, he was also prone to deviant outbursts. And I even, in my third interview with Mark, I even heard some things that I hadn't learned before, that Kaczynski would also harm animals. I knew that he was a poacher, but I did not know that he stabbed dogs in the buttocks, or that, I think it was from the FBI Files documentary, they had a recreation of one time when Ted Kaczynski waited for a different family in Montana to be out of the house, or the residents to be out of the house, rather, and then he just started striking their wall with an axe. So he's prone to these destructive outbursts when he thinks that he can get away with it. And if you've ever spent time with any other human being, no matter who he or she is, you perhaps have experienced that part as well. People's behavior will change when they believe there are not consequences for their actions that they care about. In short, if they can get away with it, oh, then they're going to do it. If no one is watching or monitoring their behavior, they're going to start doing mean and nasty and cruel things. This is why people talk about the necessity for virtue, and people need to honor and respect the moral principles that they are promoting. But with Kaczynski, he did all kinds of destructive things that are a little bit beyond a foul prank or something, like writing some graffiti on someone's driveway or the garage door, like the way Bruce Ivans would have done. That isn't on par with stabbing a dog, or even chopping down someone's wall with an axe, or striking the wall with an axe, perhaps is a better term. So, in contrast, there's a more vicious side of Kaczynski's prank behaviors, and I didn't mean prank behaviors, I meant deviant behaviors. Ivan sounds more like someone who's always trying to do this nasty and unwanted behavior in the name of humor. I mean, that's like the facade he puts on. It's actually revealing a whole lot about his mental illness. It is not funny. But that's what I think the Anthrax Killer really shows. Someone who is trying to intermingle with society, who is not trying to run away. Instead, he wants to coexist with society as an entity, but he's just going to do really nasty and annoying things, and then whenever their pressure is on, it's just going to be a self-justification. There's your contrast. The Anthrax Killer is about self-justification. The Unabomber is not, because, for the most part, Ted Kaczynski goes off to his cabin in Montana. He wants to be away from everybody, and then he's coming back into places when he wants to mail the bombs, when he wants to do destructive things. So at that point, he is not really wanting to be part of society, not living in the cabin with a wife and kids or anything like that, and working for a job that is like on the government level. No. He is more detached from society, whereas if Bruce Ivans was the Anthrax Killer, then he would be more integrated. But here's another point that is quite different. The pressure was on Bruce Ivans, and he committed suicide from an overdose of Tylenol, and there's a discrepancy. Some say that it was Tylenol PM, others say that it was Tylenol laced with codeine. But he committed suicide. Again, allegedly, maybe we don't know the full story. For the sake of this discussion, let's say Ivans was the Anthrax Killer, and he committed suicide because he believed the authorities were onto him. Kaczynski did not. He was caught, convicted I believe he was sentenced to 8 life sentences, which he is still serving now at the time of this recording. So Ivan's perhaps had somewhat of a more self-deprecating mental state, whereas somebody like Kaczynski is just a little bit angrier at the world for not allowing him to succeed in the way that he thought he should have succeeded, or the world was nastier to him than he felt that he deserved. I mean, maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, by that, maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, maybe the world was nasty to him, but absolutely no justification for his actions. 3 people died, and 23 people were injured from the Unabomber attacks. And with the Anthrax letters, as I said, 5 people died. But also, both of the people in this discussion, the Anthrax Killer and the Unabomber, have Zodiac Killer connections. They are both viewed as suspects in the Zodiac Killer murders from 1968 and 69. The Zodiac Unabomber connection, I think, has been more widely talked about. Douglas Oswell wrote a book on the subject. As I said, I've interviewed Mark Hewitt, and a lot of the source material for this episode came from our interviews. His book, Exposed, talks a lot about that. And 2 of the other people, whose names I will not mention, from the Zodiac Killer interview with the Expert series, have told me that they thought highly of Ted Kaczynski as a Zodiac Killer suspect in the past. I don't think they wanted me to talk about that because they no longer hold on to that particular theory, but it has been widely explored. With the Zodiac Anthrax connection, known as Zodianthrax, it mostly was created by Tyler Grover, whom I've been corresponding with, and as far as I understand, these are his original observations about the Zodiac Killer and the Anthrax Killer, looking at the similarities. And I think in his first email to me, he even said that it's somewhat unlikely that Bruce Ivans would be the Zodiac Killer. However, there are similarities that he has found, and if you look at both these fields, the Unabomber and the Anthrax Killer, they're both very well educated. Both had the chance to have prestigious careers for a while. Kaczynski backed out of it, but they're both PhDs. They both understand the sciences, math and the sciences, I should say. As I said, Kaczynski, PhD mathematics. Bruce Ivans was a microbiologist, and that's why they believe that he is a credible suspect in the Anthrax killings, because he would have had access to that material. And also, they both had sexually frustrated younger years. They both had some type of issue with their mothers. The comparisons and the contrasts go on and on and on. But thank you for listening to this psychological breakdown of the Unabomber and the Anthrax Killer. And as I said at the beginning, I'll try to incorporate the Long Island serial killer into more episodes. Thank you for listening to this one all the way to the end. And if you have made it to the end, one final announcement. Tomorrow we will be celebrating Christmas on this channel, to anyone who's listening to these as they come out live. And if you're listening to this in the future, feel free to have a look at some of the Christmas episodes on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. Well, that's all for me now. Anyone can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com, and see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.